The wind howled through the jagged walls of the canyon, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and dust. Down below, a faint whinny echoed, eerie yet urgent, bouncing off the rock faces like a desperate plea. Nobody expected anyone to be down here, especially not in this remote stretch of wilderness. But for Mike, a weathered rancher who had spent his life tending to the rugged lands and his horses, this canyon would change everything. Mike had been following a faint trail for hours, the sun dipping low behind the cliffs, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across the dry earth. He wasn't looking for trouble, or so he told himself, but the cries of an animal, fragile and desperate, had pulled him in. Then he saw it, a young Mustang, lying on the rocky floor of the canyon, barely breathing, ribs jutting sharply under its coat. Its eyes were wide with fear, its legs trembling with weakness. He froze, taking in the sight. There was something almost human in the horse's panic, a raw vulnerability that tugged at his chest. "Hey, easy there," he whispered, his voice soft but firm. The Mustang flinched, pulling away from him instinctively. Its wild instinct screamed danger, yet it was too weak to run. Mike knew the risks. Wild horses were not to be approached lightly, and this one was clearly in shock, dehydrated, and malnourished. Yet, he couldn't just leave it here. Something in its eyes, the quiet, desperate plea, cut through the barriers he usually maintained as a rancher. He had faced storms, fires, and broken fences, but this was something different. He pulled out a small bottle of water and some grain he always carried for emergencies. Kneeling down, he spoke in low, soothing tones, careful not to make sudden movements. "You're going to be okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The Mustang's ears twitched, eyes darting with suspicion. Yet, hunger and thirst eventually softened its instinctual fear. It lowered its head just enough to sip the water, and Mike allowed himself a cautious smile. The first hurdle was clear, gaining trust. He couldn't simply grab the horse and drag it to safety. He had to earn it. Over the next hour, he inched closer, letting the horse take the lead. The tension was palpable. Every snap of a twig, every sudden gust of wind could send the Mustang fleeing, or worse, stumbling further down the canyon. But slowly, imperceptibly, a bond began to form. As night fell, Mike fashioned a makeshift camp nearby, using blankets and a rope to create a gentle barrier. He stayed awake, speaking softly, watching the horses' breathing, listening to the sounds of the canyon around them. There was a strange beauty in this precarious situation. The loneliness of the canyon, the desperation in the horse's eyes, and the quiet strength growing between man and animal. For hours, he thought about the life this horse might have had. Had it been born wild? Abandoned by a herd? Injured in a fight or by the harsh terrain? Mike's mind wandered, but there was no time for regret, only action. By morning, he had coaxed the horse to its feet. Its legs wobbled under it, but there was a glimmer of life, of willpower. This was only the beginning. What followed would test everything Mike knew about patience, trust, and the extraordinary bond between humans and horses. Little did he know, the horse he was saving would one day return the favor in a way that would defy every expectation. And that, dear viewers, is where our story begins, a tale of survival, trust, and the kind of loyalty that can only exist between a man and a wild Mustang. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more heart-stopping, real-life horse adventures. You won't want to miss what happens next. The canyon's first light revealed the harshness of the terrain, a labyrinth of jagged rocks, hidden drop-offs, and thorny scrub that made every step a challenge. Mike's jaw was set, his hands raw from the night of careful coaxing, yet he knew the hardest part wasn't physical, it was earning the Mustang's trust. The horse, which Mike had come to think of as shadow because of its dark, almost mystical coat, had survived by instinct for every day of its life. To it, humans represented danger. Every time Mike reached out, Shadow flinched, nostrils flaring, hooves scraping the rocks as if ready to bolt into the cliffs. It was frustrating, exhausting, yet Mike felt something deeper stirring, a connection that transcended fear. Mike remembered the first time he had lost a horse on his ranch, years ago. The pain of helplessness had stayed with him, shaping the way he treated every animal afterward. That memory gave him patience. "I'm not going to leave you," he whispered. "I'll wait. I'll stay until you're ready." Over the next few days, Survival became a delicate dance. Mike had to bring water down steep inclines, fashion feeding troughs from whatever materials he could find, and stay alert for predators. Coyotes prowled the canyon at night, drawn by the scent of a weak horse. Every rustle in the bushes, every distant howl made Shadow tense, eyes darting. And yet, slowly, he began to notice the subtle shifts in the horse's demeanor, the way its ears would tilt toward him, the way it stopped trembling when he spoke gently. One evening, after a particularly long day of coaxing Shadow to eat solid food, Mike sat back against a boulder, exhausted. The horse had taken hesitant steps closer, almost brushing his hand with its muzzle. It was a tiny victory, but in that moment, Mike felt a surge of hope. He thought about the years he had spent alone on the ranch, the nights worrying about fires, storms, and the harsh realities of living off the land. And he realized something. In saving this horse, he was also saving a part of himself. But trust is fragile. One wrong move, one sudden gesture, could undo everything. And that's exactly what happened the next morning. Mike approached Shadow with a rope, intending to gently guide him toward a safer, flatter part of the canyon. For a moment, Shadow seemed calm. Then, without warning, he bolted, scraping across rocks, knocking over a makeshift water container, and sending Mike sprawling. Heart pounding, Mike scrambled after him, shouting, but the horse's panic was unrelenting. It was a humbling moment. Mike sat on the canyon floor, bruised and frustrated, realizing that control was an illusion. What mattered was respect, patience, and allowing Shadow to choose to trust him. "I get it," Mike said aloud, speaking as much to himself as to the horse. "I'll wait. We'll take it slow. We don't have to rush." And so they settled into a rhythm, days of cautious approach, nights of vigil, and the gradual softening of fear. Mike noticed small signs of personality emerge in Shadow. The flick of an ear when he called his name, the way he would nuzzle gently for a scrap of carrot, the quiet moments when he seemed to watch Mike almost with curiosity rather than suspicion. During these days, Mike's own struggles surfaced. The isolation of ranch life, the pressure to keep the land running, and the guilt over past mistakes all weighed on him. Yet, in this strange companionship, he found a sense of purpose. Shadow wasn't just a horse needing help. He was a mirror, reflecting Mike's own need for connection, understanding, and redemption. Then came the turning point. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the canyon, dark clouds gathering in minutes. Rain began to pour, slicking the rocks and turning paths into rivers of mud. Mike had to act quickly to keep Shadow from slipping, but the horse panicked at every sudden flash of lightning and rumble of thunder. Mike ran alongside him, shouting encouragement, holding out his hands as if they were lifelines. Miraculously, Shadow hesitated, then, after a tense moment, followed him to a sheltered nook beneath a cliff. That night, as the storm raged around them, Shadow stood quietly beside Mike, wet and shivering, yet no longer trembling with fear. It was a silent acknowledgement, a fragile, precious bond forged in adversity. Mike wrapped his jacket around the horse's shoulders, feeling an emotion he hadn't felt in years, a profound sense of trust and mutual reliance. By the end of that week, Shadow allowed Mike to touch him more freely, to guide him with a lead rope, and even to walk beside him without panic. The canyon that had once seemed a prison now became a place of wonder, where wild instinct met human compassion. And in those quiet moments, Mike realized something extraordinary. This horse, this wild, untamed creature, had chosen him. Not out of necessity, not out of fear, but out of a spark of connection that defied explanation. Little did he know, that spark of trust would one day save his life in ways he could never have imagined. If you're captivated by this journey, make sure to leave a like and share this story. It helps us bring more real-life horse tales to people who love them just as much as you do. And stick around, because what comes next will test the limits of human and animal loyalty in ways that are both shocking and heartwarming. The canyon had grown quiet after the storm, but an uneasy tension lingered in the air. Mike knew better than to assume calm meant safety. Nature rarely gave second chances. He and Shadow had settled into a fragile routine, cautious trust, slow progress, and careful observation of every step. But nothing could prepare him for the challenge that would come that afternoon. Mike had decided it was time to attempt a more daring rescue. Shadow needed to reach the flatter ground above the canyon, where he could recover properly and eventually return to a life free from starvation and danger. But the path was treacherous, with steep, crumbling ledges and loose stones that could give way at any moment. Every step required precise timing, patience, and, most importantly, mutual trust. As they climbed, the wind picked up again, whistling through the narrow canyon like a warning. Mike felt his pulse quicken, every instinct screaming that a misstep could be fatal. Shadow's ears twitched nervously, nostrils flaring as he sensed the precariousness of their path. Mike murmured, "We've got this. Step by step, together." Then it happened. A sharp crack echoed from above, a boulder dislodged, tumbling toward them with frightening speed. Shadow froze, panic flashing in his eyes. Instinct took over, he bolted sideways, slipping on loose gravel. Mike lunged, grabbing the lead rope with all his strength, his hands straining, heart pounding, as the horse struggled against him. For a terrifying moment, it seemed disaster was inevitable. Shadow's hooves skidded dangerously close to the cliff's edge. Mike's mind raced. If either of them fell, it would be the end. But something inside the horse shifted. He hesitated mid-stride, glancing at Mike with what seemed almost like understanding. In that heartbeat, they moved as one. Mike's steady pull, Shadow's measured step, and suddenly they were both on solid ground, hearts hammering, rain-soaked and trembling. Mike collapsed against a boulder, breathing heavily, while Shadow shook himself, ears flicking, eyes still wary but calm. "You did it, buddy," Mike whispered. "We made it through." Relief washed over him, but so did awe. He realized then that the bond they had been forging wasn't just about survival, it was about mutual respect, instinct, and unspoken trust. Shadow had chosen to listen to him when it mattered most. That night, as they huddled beneath an overhang, Mike reflected on the journey so far. He remembered the long years of isolation on the ranch, the nights of worry over droughts and lost cattle, and the heartbreak of seeing animals suffer despite his best efforts. Shadow's struggle had mirrored his own in many ways: vulnerability, fear, and the need for someone to care enough to stay. The connection was deeper than companionship, it was transformative. But even as he marveled at their progress, Mike knew this was only the beginning. Shadow was still wild at heart. Any moment of hesitation, any sign of weakness, could send him fleeing, or worse, put them both in danger again. The canyon was full of hidden hazards, sudden drop-offs, wild predators, and treacherous terrain. Trust, they both realized, would be tested repeatedly before freedom could truly be attained. Over the next days, Mike and Shadow continued to navigate the rugged landscape, facing new obstacles at every turn. A narrow ledge above a rushing stream required precise timing. One misstep would mean a fall. Shadow balked, his instincts screaming at him to turn back. Mike stayed calm, talking softly, offering gentle guidance, and gradually coaxed him forward. Step by step, the horse learned to trust Mike's judgment, even in moments when instinct demanded flight. During these trials, Mike's own humanity was laid bare. He recalled the isolation after losing his wife years ago, the quiet despair of running a ranch alone, and the sense that life's weight had grown too heavy to bear without connection. Shadow became more than a horse to him. He became a companion, a living reminder that trust and loyalty could heal wounds that time alone never could. Then came the ultimate test. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the canyon walls, Mike heard the unmistakable growl of a mountain lion in the distance. Shadow froze, muscles tense, nostrils flaring, the primal fear of prey flickering in his eyes. The predator was far enough to be cautious but close enough to threaten if they made a wrong move. Mike knew they had only seconds to act. He reached for a branch, trying to appear larger, and shouted firmly. Shadow bolted instinctively, but this time he didn't run blindly. He glanced at Mike, waiting, calculating, and then moved strategically, guided by the trust they had built together. Mike kept pace, shouting, clapping, and leading him away from the danger. Step by step, they maneuvered past the predator's territory, until finally, the mountain lion retreated into the shadows, unseen but undeniably present. Mike sank to his knees, exhausted and elated. Shadow nuzzled his shoulder, wet with sweat but safe. "You saved us both," Mike whispered, feeling a profound gratitude wash over him. In that moment, The canyon that had begun as a place of fear and desperation transformed into a sanctuary of trust and resilience. They had faced nature's fury together and emerged stronger, bonded in ways words could never fully capture. The canyon had tested them, broken them down, and rebuilt them in trust and courage. Yet, even with the danger behind them, Mike sensed that the greatest challenge was still to come. Shadow was no longer just a horse in need of care, he was a partner, a guardian, and a friend who might one day repay the loyalty that Mike had shown him. And here's the promise of what's next. The story isn't just about survival anymore. It's about a bond so profound that it will transcend danger, defy expectations, and ultimately, save a life in the most unimaginable way. If this part of the journey gave you chills, make sure to hit like and subscribe. There's more suspense, more heart, and a twist that you won't believe coming up in the next chapter. The sun was low in the sky, painting the canyon walls in fiery orange and gold, but the beauty of the moment belied the danger that lurked beneath. Mike had led Shadow up the final stretch toward safer ground, a ridge that would allow them to leave the treacherous canyon behind. But nature, as always, had other plans. A loose rock gave way under Mike's foot, sending him sliding several feet down the slope. He caught himself against a jagged boulder, but a sharp pain shot through his leg. He gritted his teeth, trying not to panic. Below him, Shadow whinnied, ears flicking back in alarm. The horse sensed the peril immediately, instinct kicking in. But this time, there was no fear, only an urgent focus on Mike. Mike tried to reach for his phone, but it had slipped into his pocket, out of reach. The isolation of the canyon became terrifyingly real. He could hear his own labored breathing and the pounding of his heart echoing off the cliffs. Every second counted. One wrong move could send him tumbling into the abyss. And then, out of instinct, out of the trust and bond they had spent weeks building, Shadow moved. The horse lunged forward, positioning himself below Mike. It was as if he knew exactly what to do. Mike grabbed the maner instinctively, holding on as Shadow braced himself against the slope. With powerful, deliberate steps, the horse inched backward toward safer, flatter ground, anchoring Mike against the rocks. The canyon floor yawned beneath them like a hungry maw, yet step by step, Shadow guided him away from the cliff edge. It was a tense, almost cinematic struggle. Man and horse relying entirely on each other, trust tested to the absolute limit. Mike's leg throbbed painfully, every movement sending shocks of pain up his body, yet he clung on. Shadow's muscles rippled under his dark coat, determination and intelligence written across his face. The storm of fear, adrenaline, and mutual reliance created a moment that Mike would never forget. The horse wasn't just saving himself, he was saving Mike. Finally, they reached a small plateau, level and secure. Mike collapsed, tears mingling with sweat and dust, gasping for breath. Shadow nuzzled him gently, whinnying softly as if to reassure him. In that instant, Mike felt the depth of what had just happened. The life of a man had been spared by the loyalty of a horse he had rescued months earlier. The gravity of the bond hit him like a tidal wave. As the evening darkened into twilight, Mike looked at Shadow with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "I don't know how I can ever repay you," he said, his voice trembling. But he didn't need to. Shadow had already shown him that trust, loyalty, and courage are rewards in themselves. The canyon had been their crucible, and they had emerged stronger, inseparable in the face of danger. Mike tended to his own injuries with whatever supplies he had, wrapping his leg as best as he could. Shadow stayed close, refusing to leave his side even for a moment. The horse that had once panicked at every touch now seemed protective, almost human in his understanding. Mike realized that Shadow had become more than a companion. He had become a guardian, a living reminder that kindness and perseverance can create bonds strong enough to defy the harshest circumstances. The story of their ordeal spread quickly through Mike's community. Neighbors came to see the horse that had saved a man's life, astonished by Shadow's bravery and intelligence. Yet Mike knew that the story wasn't about heroism in the traditional sense, it was about mutual respect, about a relationship built on patience, trust, and compassion. Shadow had returned the favor in the most profound way possible, and the rancher couldn't help but feel a deep sense of humility. In the quiet aftermath, Mike often sat with Shadow by the ridge, looking out over the canyon. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying memories of danger, fear, and triumph. Mike thought about the long hours of coaxing, the nights of storm and vigilance, the moments of panic, and the tiny victories that had built to this climax. And he realized something extraordinary. Life's most profound rewards often come not from what we take, but from what we give, and the love we show, even to those who cannot speak in human words. Shadow's story didn't end there. Over the following weeks, the horse recovered fully, thriving in the safety of the ranch while still retaining his wild spirit. Mike continued to work with him, riding cautiously at first, then gradually exploring further. Their bond deepened, enriched not just by survival but by the shared experience of fear, courage, and unwavering loyalty. And here's the truth that hits the heart. Moments like these, when a wild creature chooses to protect, to care, and to act in the service of another, remind us of the extraordinary potential in every living being. Shadow had started as a helpless, dying Mustang, unsure of the world and terrified of humans. Yet through patience, love, and trust, he had become a lifesaver, a friend, and a symbol of the indomitable bond between humans and horses. If you felt the tension, awe, and emotional weight of this story so far, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. There's one final chapter to come, where the full circle of this remarkable journey unfolds, heartwarming, emotional, and unforgettable. You won't want to miss the resolution, and the lesson that lingers long after the story ends. The days that followed the canyon ordeal were quiet, almost surreal. The danger had passed, but its memory lingered in Mike's muscles, in the ache of his leg, and in the way Shadow would not stray more than a few feet from him. There was a newfound rhythm to their lives, a balance of freedom and trust, caution and courage. But more than that, there was a profound sense of connection, the kind that doesn't need words to be understood. Mike often reflected on the months they had spent together, the long walks, the slow coaxing, the nights of storm and danger, and the first time Shadow had let him touch his mane without flinching. Every moment had been a test, a lesson, and ultimately, a gift. He remembered how hopeless the horse had seemed when he first found him, a fragile figure against the canyon walls. And now, Shadow stood proudly, strong and confident, yet forever bonded to the man who had chosen to stay. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the ridge, Mike watched Shadow grazing in the open meadow near the ranch. The horse paused, ears flicking toward him, and walked over with a gentle whinny. Mike knelt, running his hand along Shadow's neck, feeling the warmth, the muscle, the life that had once been so fragile. In that moment, he realized something extraordinary. Shadow had saved him not just physically, but emotionally, teaching him patience, resilience, and the transformative power of trust. The story of their survival spread beyond the ranch, inspiring neighbors and strangers alike. People marveled at the bond between man and Mustang, at how an animal rescued from the brink of death could turn around and save a life in return. But Mike knew the truth of the story wasn't in the headlines, it was in the quiet moments, the soft nuzzle in the early morning, the shared glances, the unspoken understanding that had taken weeks to build. Then came the day that made the bond undeniable. Mike was checking fences along the far edge of the property when a sudden landslide occurred, triggered by recent rains loosening the soil. Rocks and debris tumbled down the hill faster than he could react. Mike froze, heart racing, unable to move in time to avoid the falling rubble. Without hesitation, Shadow sprinted. With incredible speed and precision, the horse positioned himself between Mike and the danger, nudging him out of the path of the falling rocks, using his body almost like a shield. Mike barely escaped injury, heart pounding, lungs heaving, as Shadow's action saved him yet again. It was in that moment that Mike realized the true depth of what they shared. Shadow had not only returned the care he had been given, he had transcended instinct to act in love, loyalty, and awareness. The horse's courage was awe-inspiring, and Mike's gratitude was overwhelming. Tears filled his eyes as he embraced Shadow, whispering words he had never spoken to anyone. "I owe you my life, buddy. You're more than a horse, you're family." Life after that day took on a new meaning. Shadow remained wild in spirit, but gentle and loyal in practice. Mike continued to ride him, train him, and care for him, but more importantly, he learned to let go of control, to respect Shadow's autonomy, and to marvel at the intelligence and heart that this creature possessed. Their bond became a daily reminder of what patience, trust, and empathy could accomplish. Friends and visitors to the ranch often asked Mike how he had tamed such a wild horse, but he would smile and shake his head. "I didn't tame him," he would say. "He chose to trust me, just as I chose to trust him. That's what made all the difference." It was a lesson he carried not just in his relationship with Shadow, but in life itself. Trust, patience, and compassion were the greatest powers any of us could wield. Even years later, Mike would tell the story to anyone who would listen. Children wide-eyed at the canyon, neighbors leaning in at the local fair, strangers watching a short video online. They all marveled at the courage of the Mustang and the resilience of the man who had refused to give up. And always, at the heart of the story, was the truth. A wild horse, once weak and alone, had returned the gift of life in ways Mike could never have imagined. And as the sun set over the ranch, painting the fields in gold and crimson, Mike sat quietly beside Shadow. The horse lowered his head to nuzzle Mike gently, a gesture of trust, gratitude, and unwavering loyalty. It was a moment suspended in time, a testament to the extraordinary bond between human and animal, forged through fear, compassion, and the courage to care. So if you felt the awe, the tension, and the emotional weight of this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stories like these remind us that the world is full of wonder, bravery, and love, sometimes found in the unlikeliest of places, even in the eyes of a wild horse who once teetered on the edge of life. Because in the end, it's not just about survival, it's about connection, loyalty, and the extraordinary capacity for both humans and animals to save each other. And that, dear viewers, is the miracle of Shadow, the Mustang who returned a life for a life, and the rancher who learned that love and trust can overcome even the harshest wilderness.